Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of Imperial Diecast. So today, I'm going to be reviewing this ancient Bburago model from 1988. Yep. This is a more than 30-year-old car, sitting right here in front of you. I mean, this diecast model is older than I am, and yet it looks almost brand new. That, my friends, are the fruits of taking good care of your models. And this chiefly goes out to the previous owner because I bought this car second-hand for less than 10 euros. With box though, although this is what 30 years does to a box. 1985 was the year when Back to the Future was made. And for Doc Brown's car they went with the DMC DeLorean with its gull-wing doors. But I have always wondered, what other car existed back in 1985 that totally looked like something from the future? And that's this, the Lamborghini Countach. And you know what? As a fan of the Back to the Future franchise, I'm not the only guy who had this train of thought. Someone else actually took the trouble and created an alternate Back to the Future time machine, but using a Lamborghini Countach instead. And it looks fantastic. But I guess the reason the directors didn't go with the Countach is because it's an American movie. And an Italian exotic would feel out of place in the Back to the Future universe, which is primarily centered around the town of Hill Valley, California. So they went with an American car. But still, the Countach would have been a great alternative. Speaking of which, have you ever asked yourself the question what Countach actually means? Well, you're on the right channel because here you'll actually get an answer to that. You see, the word comes from the Piemontese language, spoken only by a few 100,000 people in northwestern Italy. And the meaning of Countach in Piemontese is that it is a word uttered as a sign of astonishment and appreciation. Like if a Piemontese person sees something and then goes, "Goodness, awesome," or "amazing." And one of the engineers of Lamborghini back in the day was a Piemontese guy, and he always used to have that expression. So when they were designing this car, they just decided to go with the expression he always uses and called it the Countach. Lamborghini built the Countach from 1974 all the way to 1990. And what's so iconic about this car is that way back in the mid-1970s when this car hit the market, there really was nothing like this out there. This is pretty much the car that pioneered the whole jagged and angular concept of a futuristic exotic supercar. And the design was conceptualized by Marcello Gandini from Bertoni. And Bertoni is to Lamborghini what Pininfarina is to Ferrari, always competing against one another. And Gandini was the same guy who designed the predecessor of the Countach, the car that pretty much founded the whole modern mid-engine sports car layout, namely the Lamborghini Miura, which I have already reviewed on my channel, so you can go check it out in the search function of my videos. And the Countach is such a radical departure from the Lamborghini Miura's design, which was very much in line with the playful curves of the 1960s Ferraris. So here we have the same guy, Marcello Gandini, coming up with these sharp, angular design cues to create a radically different looking car. Same guy, yet two completely different styles. So taking a look at the front of the car, this is probably the best part about the 1980s look of the Lamborghini Countach, because what's so interesting about this car is that it actually has a whole bunch of headlights. But before we get to those, on this model what I appreciate most is the fact that this is a gloss black Lamborghini Countach. But Bburago also makes this car in a metallic black, which is something that has already been reviewed by another channel here on YouTube. And apart from that, Bburago also makes this car in red. And of course, they also make it in 1/18 scale instead of 1/24. The Countach, in fact, is so popular that even other more high-end manufacturers make this car, including Kyosho and I believe even AutoArt. Kyosho, in fact, made two different versions of this car. Their first release was from like about 10 years ago, where they made a Countach with opening parts, and that car is ridiculously hard to get these days, at least for a decent price. It sells for over $250. But then they used that same mold and are now selling a sealed version of it, which you can get for around 50, 60, maybe even 70 euros on eBay and other online diecast shops as well. So if you cannot get your hands on the 1/18 scale Kyosho Countach with opening parts, then the sealed version would be a nice alternative if you think that the 1/18 Bburago is just not up to par. But returning to this 1/24 scale Lamborghini Countach here, I mean, the front is done actually pretty well. And we're going to begin by taking a look at the Lamborghini logo in the middle. This is just a sticker, and it's placed a little too high, and it's a little too big actually. It's supposed to be a bit smaller because it's out of proportion with the rest of the vehicle. But I mean, you can see the Raging Bull and you can see Lamborghini written on top, so there's that. But now let's take a closer look at these headlights. I mean, okay, so first of all, these are not the car's headlights, but the fog lights, because the actual headlights are these pop-up ones, which are currently closed, and of course they cannot pop up on this 1/24 scale model. You'd have to buy the original Kyosho with opening parts to have that. Speaking of which, there's actually also a Tonka polystyrene version of the Countach. It's also 1/18 scale, but I think it's actually a little bigger than 1/18. I think it's 1/16. So I'm not sure on that one. But before I veer off any further, let's return to this 1/24 scale. I mean, I really appreciate the level of detail that these fog lights here have. First of all, they have a separate glass texture. And if you look at the reflectors, they're also in this chrome. And the lights themselves don't have any pegs on them, and also look great. They look very realistic. And aren't red, which for some strange reason the fog lamps are on the 1/18 scale Bburago. And if we move further down, you can see that this entire front part of the vehicle has another set of fog lamps, which are also designed very well, no pegs. And to either side, we also have these vents, and they are perforated on this 1/24 scale Bburago. So here's the car's side profile, and perhaps here you'll notice the biggest difference between this 1/24 scale model and the real Lamborghini Countach, which is that this 1/24 scale model does not have any windows. Now usually this isn't a huge issue, but on the Countach's case, the windows actually have like a frame, a particular frame built into them, which basically separates the main window into a front vent glass over here, and then you have like another frame that's going like this. Now, I personally am not a huge fan of this frame, so I actually don't mind if my model does not have it, but if you want it, you'll have to get the 1/18 scale Countach instead. And on the Bburago and the Tonka polystyrene, you just get the frame, but if you want the glass as well, then you'll have to go for the Kyosho. Another interesting difference between this 124 scale Countach and the 118 Bburago is that on the 118 Bburago, the wheels are actually too big. I mean, they look completely out of proportion and almost remind me of the wheels of a monster truck, in the sense that they are like about this big, like right there, like that. And not only that, but the rims themselves also are not chrome, but matte silver. Which I guess is a little more realistic, because on the real Countach the rims are matte silver. But just being put off by the size of those huge wheels, that's why I'm happy that this 124 looks more like the real Countach in terms of proportion. Over on the right, you can see the Disegno Bertone sticker. We also have these really cool air intakes over here. And what's interesting is that even though this is a 124 scale model, all of this is perforated. That's another trait of a 1980s Bburago. And now let's check out the wheels. So these are the typical rims that the 1980s Countach came with. And if you pay a little bit attention to what's written on the tire walls, it actually says over here 265/50 VR15, I think. And then it says Bburago as well. Can't really see any brake discs or calipers, although you have to keep in mind this is a 1980s Countach, which means that it probably had brake pads back in the day instead of discs. And here we are at the back of the car. You'll notice that because of the age of this car, over 30 years, the rear license plate, which is a sticker, has started to peel off. But it does say MO for Modena, I assume, 983. And both the Lamborghini logo as well as the Countach branding are made out of separate metal pieces, although they're a bit too big in relation to the rest of the car. I think Bburago just made like a single set of these, both for the 124 and 118 scale cars, and then they just decided to put the same one on both models. But I'm not sure. Now if you look at the taillights, you'll notice that these look a little different to the ones on a regular Countach, because the ones that you're usually used to seeing are like entirely red, like this entire part is red, just like over here, and not just the lights in the middle. However, you have to keep in mind that this is not the original Countach version, but rather the 5000 Quattro Valvole. So this is a Countach from the late 80s, and by then, I'm going to show you a picture of the real car of this time. You'll notice that the taillights had also evolved and were no longer entirely red, but only the lights in the middle were. So Bburago has actually done this as best as they can. This is not a deviation from what it's supposed to look like. But yeah, I mean, the earlier version of the Countach had larger taillights. And the taillights themselves don't have a whole lot of detail. I mean, you can see that they have like a texture, but at least they don't have any pegs, so that's good. And the red contrasts with the black pretty well. Now, if you look further down, you'll notice that this car has a quad exhaust. And this is uncolored, as in just black plastic, in the regular 124 scale Bburago version, but on mine I decided to paint this as well as the fuel tank in silver, just to give it a little bit more detail. Because of its 16-year run, the Countach evolved over time, not just externally, gaining fender flares and a spoiler that cost an additional $5,000, but also internally in terms of performance. However, all of them came with a naturally aspirated V12 engine. This diecast model you're looking at here is the 1988 LP5000 Quattro Valvole. So this one's engine is a 5.2 liter 4 valves per cylinder, Quattro Valvole in Italian, hence the model's name. The European version had the more powerful engine with 449 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, capable of 0 to 100 km per hour in 4.8 seconds with a top speed of 298 km per hour. In addition to the fender flares and the spoiler, Another change to earlier Countach models was that the carburetors were moved from the sides to the top of the engine for better cooling. Unfortunately, this created a hump on the engine cover, which Bburago has replicated, further reducing the already poor rear visibility to almost zero. Some people call 124 scale cars toys, but I disagree, because Bburago has really paid a lot of attention to detail and replicated the design cues of the real car very well on this diecast model. I mean, this whole back part here was not easy to cast as a mold, and these rear louvers, for example, are perforated as well. So in regard to the engine detail, I mean, you can see that this brace around the valves says Lamborghini. You can see the air hoses leading into the engine. The engine itself is cast in chrome and has a fair bit of detail. I mean, if you count these individual valves, you can see that there are 6 on either side, so this is a V12. And this engine goes all the way down. I mean, just look at that. Look at the depth of this. This is crazy. But yeah, pretty detailed. And now let's check out the interior. And before we do that, just look at these scissor doors. I mean, this was the first Lamborghini to feature scissor doors, and so it was a huge innovation. And it looks cool to this day. And the fact that on this 30-year-old model, these scissor doors, that they still stay up, that's actually pretty impressive. So kudos to Bburago on that one. So the interior of this 124 scale Bburago Lamborghini Countach is kept in this two-tone, sort of gray and beige color combination. And if you look at the instrument panel and the center console and basically everything, I mean, it has very much a mid-80s vibe going on. If you look at the floor, there's a little bit of a texture there, kind of like a floor mat texture. No dorsal branding, unfortunately. That is reserved for the 118 scale. And these details here at the center console are all cast in chrome. I mean, look at that. They're all individual pieces. They're like not a sticker or anything. And Bburago actually went all the way to include every single one of these in the model. That's actually a lot of attention to detail. You can see the manual stick shift in the middle. And behind it, we have what appears to be like an ashtray. And now let's check out the driver's side. Before we do, notice the detail on the door. You can see that this even comes with the manual window crank. Alright, now let's go to the driver's side. So looking at the driver's side, you can see that we have this retro 3-spoke steering wheel. And it even has a raised Lamborghini Bull logo in the center. You can see we have the e-brake cast from a separate chrome piece. Same goes for the clutch, the brake, and the gas pedal, all made out of chrome. The instrument panel is just a sticker though, but you can see that it does have the individual gauges, just like on the real Lamborghini Countach. And now let's check out these seat details here. And you can see that they actually do put a lot of detail for these seats. You can see the pleating and everything. And we also have like speakers over here for the sound system. I mean, yeah, so this is actually a pretty detailed interior. Although I personally think that it would have looked better if it had been colored differently. The steering wheel works. And finally, here is a look at the bottom of the car. I mean, just look at all the details going on here. This is why you must appreciate one of the older Bburagos that were made in the 1980s and early 1990s, because they just had so much detail, especially when it came to perforation and stuff like that. So you can see it says Lamborghini Countach 1988 Bburago Scala 124. Made in Italy, of course. So let's check out the front over here. All the perforation and everything. Visible, nice tire tread. And then, like, these parts here in the middle. And here's the transmission detail. Everything cast in chrome. And just look at all these valves and pipes off the engine. And the perforated louvers that I was talking about earlier. All that detail visible through the bottom. Now, I did paint the fuel tank in matte silver myself. This was just black plastic on the actual Bburago model. But everything else was done by Bburago. And so, very impressive stuff. Guys, thanks again for checking out this review. I have also reviewed the predecessor and the successor of this car, both the Lamborghini Miura and the Lamborghini Diablo, so make sure to check out those reviews if you can. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Imperial Diecast, signing out.